Henry Wadsworth Longfellow lived in a defining age of American history. Born when the country was only 31 years old, he went on to write poems which have become cultural icons in the United States and beyond. In the 1830s, he moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and taught languages at Harvard College. Although he was a good professor, his ambitions were more literary, and he eventually left his job to focus solely on his poetry. Today, he's considered the first professional poet in American history. His writings were immensely popular and profitable, and generations that followed have memorized his poetry. Words like the Songs about Hiawatha, The Children's Hour, Paul Revere's Ride, and Evangeline. Beloved by young and old, his grandfatherly image with his long white beard has become just as iconic as his writing. But did you know that he did not grow his beard until he was an older man? Literary historian Rob Velella portrays Longfellow in his younger years as a struggling professor with poetic aspirations.
You'll excuse me. I rarely speak in public, and certainly not about a topic as dull as myself. But I did prepare some notes from my journals and letters and writings, even a speech or two. I should begin at the beginning. When I was still a teenager, I told my father what my aspirations were. I wrote to him, "I will not disguise it in the least. The fact is, I most eagerly aspire after future eminence in literature. My whole soul burns most ardently after it, and every earthly thought centers in it. If I can ever rise in the world, it must be in the wide field of literature." Now, this is a bold aspiration. Oh, I've always loved literature and poetry. In fact, I published my first poem when I was but 13 years old. I remember walking down the street in my native town of Portland, Maine, to the newspaper office. And very quietly, I put my manuscript into the letterbox, then ran away before anyone could see me. No one knew. And when it was finally published, I was at a friend's house, and his father read the paper and said, "Did you see the poem in today's paper? Very stiff, remarkably stiff." Yes, he was a ferocious critic. Well, that was my first indication. It is the prerogative of the poet to give pleasure, but it is the critic's province to give pain. The fact is, however, by the time I moved to Massachusetts, my teaching job took up so much of my time that I had little opportunity for my leisurely studies or my creative writing. My first books were prose, textbooks, in fact. Then I wrote a book of travel essays and even a novel. Finally, settled in Massachusetts, I turned to the pastime of my youth, poetry. Finally, I started writing poems again, and one of my earliest was written about a man in Cambridge whom I walked by on my way to work every morning. He was the village blacksmith. Under a spreading chestnut tree, the village smithy stands. The smith, a mighty man is he, with large and sinewy hands, and the muscles of his brawny arms are strong as iron bands. His hair is crisp and black and long. His face is like the tan. His brow is wet with honest sweat. He earns whate'er he can, and looks the whole world in the face, for he owes not any man. Week in, week out, from morn till night, you can hear his bellows blow. You can hear him swing his heavy sledge with measured beat and slow, like a sexton ringing the village bell when the evening sun is low. And children coming home from school look in at the open door. They love to see the flaming forge and hear the bellows roar and catch the burning sparks that fly like chaff from a threshing floor. He goes on Sunday to the church and sits among his boys. He hears the parson pray and preach. He hears his daughter's voice singing in the village choir, and it makes his heart rejoice. It sounds to him like her mother's voice singing in paradise. He needs must think of her once more, how in the grave she lies, and with his hard, rough hand he wipes a tear out of his eyes. Toiling, rejoicing, sorrowing, onward through life he goes. Each morning sees some task begin, each evening sees it close. Something attempted, something done, has earned a night's repose. Thanks to thee, my worthy friend, for the lesson thou hast taught. Thus at the flaming forge of life, our fortunes must be wrought. Thus on its sounding anvil shaped each burning deed and thought. I was quite lucky to live in Massachusetts, where I was surrounded by so many other aspiring writers. My friends included Oliver Wendell Holmes, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Nathaniel Hawthorne. These friends shared my interest in literature, and we often spoke of our difficulties and our hopes. My friends often encouraged my own work, thinking I had done much good for the world. But I always thought I could do more. Well, we judge ourselves by what we feel capable of doing. Only others judge us by what we have already done. I once said that music is the universal language of mankind. Well, I have often thought that poetry and music are quite similar. In fact, I often referred to my poems as songs. And as I struggled to become a more well-known poet, I learned to be satisfied merely by the admiration of my friends. This poem is called The Arrow and the Song. I shot an arrow into the air. It fell to earth, I knew not where. For so swiftly did it fly, the sight could not follow it in its flight. I breathed a song into the air. It fell to earth, I knew not where. For who has sight so keen and strong that it can follow the flight of song? Long afterward, in an oak, I found the arrow still unbroke, and the song from beginning to end I found again in the heart of a friend. Although I suffered many hardships in my life, both personal and professional, I always tried to view the world with a sunny disposition, you might say. It is difficult to maintain such optimism amid the cares of life when there is no sunshine in the soul. Equally problematic is when there is no sunshine in the sky. We have each seen a dismal, rainy day. Sorrow seeks out such days as this. Perhaps I can offer an alternative perspective in the form of a poem I wrote called The Rainy Day. The day is cold and dark and dreary. It rains and the wind is never weary. The vine still clings to the moldering wall, but at every gust the dead leaves fall, and the day is dark and dreary. My life is cold and dark and dreary. It rains and the wind is never weary. My hopes still cling to the moldering past, but the hopes of youth fall thick in the blast, and the day is dark and dreary. Be still, sad heart, and cease repining. Behind the clouds is the sun still shining. Thy fate is the common fate of all. Into each life some rain must fall. Some days must be dark and dreary. My hope is that men of talent can devote their time to creating literature and poetry in our still young country. Someday I hope to see that our native writers have achieved great work. But as yet, we can boast of nothing farther than the beginning of a national literature, a literature associated and linked in with the grand and beautiful scenery of our country, with our institutions, our manners, our customs. In a word, with all that has helped to form whatever there is peculiar to us and to the land in which we live. We cannot yet throw off our literary allegiance to Old England. We cannot yet remove from our shelves every book which is not strictly American. But when will our poets rise? Poetry with us has never yet been anything but a pastime. We are a plain people that have had nothing to do with the mere pleasures and luxuries of life. We seem to have an aversion to everything that is not practical. But if we would ever have a national literature, our native writers must be patronized. We must become hearty well-wishers to our native authors, and with them there must be a deep and thorough conviction of the glory of their calling, an utter abandonment of everything else, and a noble self-devotion to the cause of literature. We have indeed much to hope from these things, for our hearts are already growing warm towards our literary adventurers. But think of it, the scenery of our country, so rich and beautiful and magnificent, and so full of quiet loveliness. Its language is in high mountains and in the pleasant valleys scooped out between them. No, our poetry is not in books alone. It is in the hearts of those who have gone into nature. Thus shall the mind take color from things around us. From them shall there be a genuine birth of enthusiasm, a rich development of poetic feeling that shall break forth in song. We may rejoice then in the hope of our national literature, for no people are richer than we are in the treasures of nature. And well may each of us feel a glorious and high-minded pride in saying we have a national literature. Oh dear, it seems I have taken too much of your time already. Perhaps I can conclude with one more poem. The day is done, and the darkness falls from the wings of night, as a feather is wafted downward from an eagle in his flight. I see the lights of the village gleam through the rain and the mist, and a feeling of sadness comes over me that my soul cannot resist. A feeling of sadness and longing that is not akin to pain and resembles sorrow only as the mist resembles the rain. Come, read to me some poem, some simple and heartfelt lay that shall soothe this restless feeling and banish the thoughts of day. Read from some humbler poet whose songs gush from his heart as showers from the clouds of summer or tears in the eyelids start. Then read from the treasured volume the poem of thy choice, and lend to the rhyme of the poet the beauty of thy voice. And the night shall be filled with music, and the cares that infest the day shall fold their tents like nomads and as silently steal away.